everybody, and welcome to this episode of the Real Life Sex Chat Show, where we like to highlight all of the many varieties of ways in which people have the sovereignty to choose how they structure their own romantic relationships, intimate relationships, and be themselves in a world that likes to put people in neat little boxes, which doesn't often fit for most people. So I have an amazing guest today, and I'm going to just read you her bio, and then we're going to get right into the good stuff. So Parchelle Tashi is a former high school math teacher, which I've already talked to her about, that scares me, with a master's in curriculum and instruction, turned creative entrepreneur and award-winning video producer. With 10 plus years of production experience with well-known brands and teams, she's been sought out for her expertise in video production, online education, and business growth. Parchelle currently resides in San Diego, jealous, serving as CEO at 36,000 Feet, an education creation agency that specializes in converting best-selling books into profitable online courses. And Parchelle also is the host of the new podcast, The Author's Leverage. So Parchelle, thank you so much for agreeing to come here and chat with me today. How are you feeling?
I'm great, Danielle. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So I like to always share the truth. Parchelle and I connected like in a networking way. We know like a mutual friend. I'm an author. She helps authors, and we kind of connected on a phone call, which was just kind of a connection call. And the next thing you know, we're just chatting it up like I always like to do about ourselves and sexuality and identity, because that's, as you know, that's what I do. So I said to her, would you like to be interviewed for the series? And she so graciously said yes, because her story to me is super, super interesting and very, very representative of probably a ton of people's experience in this world in some way, shape, or form. And I think it's important to highlight these kind of ways in which that we come into the world and find ourselves. So if you would be willing to kind of share kind of how you were brought up, where you went with that, and how that led you to where you are now. And I know that'll probably be a bit of a long story, but I think it's a very interesting story. So start wherever you want.
Okay. Well, I grew up in Virginia Beach area, and a two-parent household, and I'm the oldest of three kids. So, but one thing I would say is I tell people I feel like I was born at the altar in church, so to speak, like just birthed at the altar in a sense, because growing up in church and in that religious context was really all that I knew. We went to church. We weren't the family that just went to church on Sundays or on special occasions. I mean, we were like dedicated. It was like we're there on Sunday, then on Wednesday for something, and then Tuesday for Bible study, and then choir practice, and then something else on a weekend. I mean, it was quite a bit. So we were this was pretty much our lives. Wow. And so, but growing up in that context, you know, I was also very much kind of sheltered in a sense. I feel like in a lot of ways, since I kind of moved bits and bits away from where I grew up, is when I started to really, of course, experience other things, almost like a kid for the first time seeing like, oh my God, you know, but I'm an adult kind of a thing. Yeah. So, but yeah, it's been so many different experiences in that regard, in terms of how I was raised. And even in my entrepreneur story, like hearing the bio that you mentioned of me, I'm like, wow, like I started off as a high school teacher, which was what my mom was. She just retired. And it's just bit by bit, I don't know, just was exposed to something new that excited me, that I knew that there was more to than what I experienced. Yeah. And so in a lot of different, from what you were taught and from what you were sort of conditioned to be. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's kind of like a general, yeah.
Yeah. So, and you mentioned what you were conditioned to be, and I'm big into human psychology. It's been my entire career. Very, very interested in conditioning, environmental conditioning. And so could you expand a little bit on what kind of that conditioning of growing up in the church, as far as how you were supposed to structure your relationships in a romantic sense? What was the narrative that you were conditioned with in that organization?
Definitely, I would say we were conditioned to, you know, be married to, you know, a man, or, you know, if you're a man married to a woman, And we were also conditioned, I would say specifically in my household, we did not have any exposure to sexual, conversations or sexual imagery really. And it was to the point where my dad, who was really into movies, right? There's all kinds of movies with sex scenes or even cuss words or anything. I remember back in the day, you could record a movie was showed up on TV on VHS,
The record button.
Yes. And I don't know, like somehow he just knew when those parts would come up or something and would literally like change the channel or do something just to bleep out that scene.
Or there was an actual effort put into avoidance of having any dialogue. Okay.
Yeah. And also too, I would say that even after I became, I guess you could say an adult, I'm 18, I'm in college, that's sort of the prime opportunity for someone to be free, right? So you're not at home, you got your own dorm, there's parties, there's all that kind of stuff going on. When I got to college, which I went to Virginia Tech, I literally went to like maybe 2 parties. And then after that, I got hooked up with a Christian organization. And from there was further conditioning about, ideas around sex. And we were not encouraged necessarily to really even hold hands or to kiss or anything because it could lead to something else. So those conditions and things really just kind of, I just like a newbie at everything in a sense when it came to, as these layers started to come off, it was like, whoa, like this, you do that, like you're allowed to do that, like you're free to do that, like, but it was just interesting, but definitely within that religious context, it was you're conditioned to do the right thing. And that was, as you mentioned before, a way that you gained acceptance and were considered to be normal to do those things.
Normal, right. And that's for me, like the most deeply problematic aspect of not just religious, any conditioning where your worth as a person, as a being is based upon conditionality that is man-made, right? Like it's not, but it's in religion, it's in the context of, well, it's God that's telling you that these are the things, but the reality of it is all religion was made by men. Doesn't, it is what it is. And we don't need to get too deep into that, but the reality of it is that it then psychologically certainly begins conditioning you to say, well, if I don't do X, Y, and Z, then I'm not worthy of love. I'm not worthy of acceptance. I'm not worthy of sometimes for people existing, right? Which is just so detrimental. And we talked about this before, and I think that it's important to kind of highlight that you followed that path, right? Like you even, and did, I don't know if we talked about before, but did you have any nudges back then that path, as far as getting married to a man, was not the one that you wanted and you did it anyway? Or did you just say, oh, you were still very young and you were like, well, obviously this is what I'm being told is right, so I better do it? Kind of what was that experience like for you?
Yeah, it was conflicting. I'll say that matter, because I was always more emotionally connected with other women. Right. Again, because sexuality and sexual imagery, or even seeing 2 women together, because I didn't see that, I didn't have that connection, but I knew that I was naturally and felt more connected and just felt more at peace and at home with other female friends, if you will. But it's funny because the night before I got married to a man, so that's the other, I did get married to a man, and within my religious context was the only man I had ever been with at that time. So, and I shouldn't say like in a relationship, but I mean sexually, he was the only man I'd been with. So the night before we got married, I had this dream where in the dream I was with a woman, this dark-skinned woman. I didn't know who it was. I'd never met this woman before or anything, but I knew that like something felt like I felt like I was hiding something from him or whatever. And it was like literally the night before we got married, but I still got married. Mm-hmm. We did all this planning. I didn't know who this woman was in my dream. Like it wasn't anything like that, but it was a notion there that something is there, but I didn't know what it was. I didn't know how to identify it. And all I knew was my next step is to get married.
Yeah. And so
did. Yeah.
And how did that go? I mean, how did that work out? Obviously, with the conflicting issues going on, and the conditioning background and you finding your way.
Yeah, we were definitely good friends.
Yeah.
I would say. And it was 7 years we were married.
Wow.
Yeah. 7 years we were married. Definitely some ups and downs in that regard and, expectations, communication issues, so forth and so on. However, once because we moved to San Diego to be closer to his son. And once we got here, like 3 months later, he said he didn't want to be married anymore. And it was interesting because my mindset at the time was, we're just here. We're going to make this work out here. And honestly, if he had not done that, it's scary to say, but I might have still been with him, if that makes sense, because that was that's just what I knew. And I attached so much worth to that, to be able to say my husband, to be able to say, oh, I have a husband. I knew that it said something to people, and I had an attachment to that.
Yeah.
So when he said he didn't want to be married, I was like, oh my God, what do you mean? Like this is what we're supposed to do. But to this day, I always credit him for his courage to even have said that.
Yeah.
Because I think, ultimately we knew, or maybe he knew first, like that this wasn't love, but I thought it was love because it's just what you do. So having seen my parents, they weren't divorced. His parents are still together. You get through it, the thick and the thin, or whatever challenges there are. So that was just my expectation that we would do the same. And I just would dismiss anything else outside of any feelings, whatever. I just was happy to be somewhat normal and to say I had a husband.
Yeah. And so with that kind of expression that he said, I don't want to be married anymore, what was that like for you in the process of separation? And during that time, when did you kind of start leaning into the fact that dream that you had was obviously somebody that was waiting for you? I mean, we already know, but somebody was in your soul, in your kind of energetic purview, if you want to, give it a name, and you knew it, and maybe that person knew it. So how did, from the separation or divorce from your husband to where you are now, which you can tell folks where you are now, what was that process like?
Yeah. So now fast forward through all that, I'm with a woman. She is a dark-skinned woman, which is like crazy. Yeah. And we've been together now for 3 years. And, I thought that what I had with him was love, because it was what was painted as this is what love is. But it wasn't until, being with this amazing woman that I'm like, wow, this is okay. This is love. So I'm trying to, so once we had separated and gone through that process, it was kind of a sucky situation, because we had just got an apartment in San Diego, and we were 3 months into our lease, you know what I mean? And then he breaks this news. So it was a 2-bedroom apartment. So we ended up basically being roommates at that time. And through that, we did start having more conversations, and just what we were always, like, at the end of the day, friends. And so we started to have open conversations about it. And he was that sort of confident, honestly for me, when I started saying, okay, maybe I should get on the dating profile thing or whatever, and I would do it. And, the option, you're interested in men or women or both. And I put both just because I thought, okay, let's see what that's about. So it was interesting to see that evolve. But then once I did actually, find someone to be with in that sense, that's when he was kind of like, I don't know, feeling differently about it at that point, because it was actually being real, that this is actually happening, that things are changing. But it was definitely an interesting time for sure, like just that transition away from that. But I'm very grateful to say that it was peaceful. Our separation and our divorce was amicable. I mean, we were in person to sign papers and everything. So that's just how it went. So I think that it was I would say a smooth and peaceful sort of transition into this new world for me. Yeah.
Yeah. And for me, feelings, are my driving force. Like I say my feelings are my compass, and I use joy and I use like bliss and feeling. Those are like when I feel it in my body, that's like how I know I'm on the right track. And so is there kind of a way, I don't know if you can or not, but like to compare the feeling of love that you thought was love to the feeling of love that you were like, oh damn, no, this is love. Like how can you express that?
The only way that I can express it is that it was just like an expanded feeling.
Mm-hmm.
It just was way more expansive of, this feeling like, yes, I love this person,
Sure.
but to be in love, I guess, is the difference.
Yeah.
And that's what I felt was like truly being in love with another person. The other thing too, that was a big signal that something was right here was in our communication. So my girlfriend, her name is Moya. So when we actually met playing pickleball, which is like extremely random, but we took a trip together to Thailand. Ooh. And we were in Thailand, and it was like we were probably not even like together like a month at that point. We went to Thailand together. Wow. But while we were there, we had some bit of an argument. I mean, it wasn't an argument, but it was like a disagreement that came up, and we had to have a conversation. And I remember the conversation literally lasting 3 minutes, and it was like everything was good. And and it was a complete contrast to my experience before, because it was like over that thing or something even less big of a deal, it was going to be like at least a week of or 2 weeks of like attitude or no talking and, just that sort of experience. And I always thought to myself like, oh my God, does it really have to be this? Am I crazy? Does this issue mean there's like a full week of all of this? Like, and so after we had Moya and I, after we had that interaction and we communicated and talked through our issue within like 3 minutes, like I was in tears. I was in tears and how everything just went so smoothly, and we're able to communicate and get over whatever challenge it was. I honestly don't even remember what it was, but it didn't matter because it was like, wow, like this is someone that I can truly communicate with and who can understand the purity of my intention in my heart.
Yeah. And they can know that even if all humans are going to disagree in relationship, period. Like there's, 15 years of marriage with my husband, and we have this very similar, almost the same values and outlooks, and we share almost everything the same. But at the same time, there are sometimes we disagree. And for us, that's a very similar, the way in which that you are describing what happened with you. And is it Moya? M-O-I-A?
Moya. Yeah. M-O-Y-A. Yeah.
Yeah. It's the same. And we've even implemented different practices, like, because I am a little bit like, well, I used to be much more angry of a person. And my husband, he's just like, I don't really want to fight. Like, I want to just love you. And so we have like this thing where if we notice that we're like things are getting a little heated or disagreeing, we'll be like, freeze frame, like, okay. And so even if we're still mad or annoyed, we'll be like, okay, it's whatever's happening right now, it's not really worth escalating it. And that communication I think that is a kind of cornerstone to a healthy, generative, loving relationship, because we both, like you just said, you said it so perfectly, with, the intentions, the pure intentions of that person's heart. And that they're not actually trying to hurt you or do something detrimental to the relationship. It's just something is lost in the communication mix. And I think that is just so powerful. And like you said, you were crying because I imagine you were hoping that was a possibility for you in your life. And then you realized, oh, this can be the way it is for me for the rest of my life. And so has that been the way it's been since you've been in relationship with
our communication continues to grow and expand as we get new different things to deal with, right? And different challenges and whatnot. But at the end of the day, we still are able to communicate and to see each other for who we are.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
And the other thing that's interesting too is that she's a bit older than me too. So
I was going to ask
there's
about
like
that
this,
soon. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, a bit of an age, what do you call it, age gap relationship or whatever. Yeah. But it's just so interesting. I mean, we're really connected to growth for ourselves and spirituality and just adventure in life. And we share those values really strongly. So communication is just part of how we keep that going. We have a process that we do sometimes called venting. So if there is something that's going on that's bothering one or the other, we approach each other and say, hey, I have a vent. It's about a level 7. Do you have time to hear this?
I love that. That is, please share more about this practice.
Or whatever level.
That's a powerful practice. Yes.
Yeah, we learned this through a couple Kirti and Shofar that are also based in San Diego here. But yeah, it's a venting process. So you usually open up the conversation like that if you have something to get out or to talk about that's bothering you or that has affected you in some way. And essentially, the rules of the way it goes is, if the person agrees, yeah, I have time to hear it. We make the time for it, and essentially just you share whatever it is that you need to say, and the other person can only listen, can't say anything while you are venting. Mm-hmm. After you're done, you say, okay, that's it, I'm done. That's what I had to say. Then the other person, their response next is, what can I do to support you? Do you need for me to repeat back what I heard? Mm-hmm. Do you need empathy? Do you need physical touch? Those are the main 3 options, but there can be other options or whatever you sort of developed or have for yourself that works. But we give each other those options, and then from there, it just kind of seals it up. And if there's anything needs to happen on the back end of that, we tackle that as well. But it's just an open way just to get out whatever it is. And it's extremely helpful. Sometimes it's like a level 2. Sometimes it's like a level 9. Sometimes it's like, you know what? I need the afternoon so we can talk about this.
A lot of space for this. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is just an incredibly powerful and meaningful and intentional practice. And I know for sure that if other people in relationship with one another would be willing to explore this, it would change the face of the ways in which they interact with each other. And I think for a lot of people, what that requires is a certain level of emotional intelligence and certainly a level of patience. And I think for me, and this is something I've gone live about a couple times, is about one of the biggest problems that people have in relationships from my observational analysis is the need to be right. It's just, whatever it is, it doesn't matter what's going on in the relationship. It's like, even if you're not right, but the need to be right is the driver. And therefore it's just constant headbutting because no one is willing to give that space. I think it's spaciousness at the core of what you're saying, is saying you're both willing to give each other the space that you need to express the emotions that you're feeling. You don't demonize negative. I don't like calling emotions negative. They're all very valuable and valid. In my opinion, all emotions need to be sat with and expressed and felt. But the ones that maybe are not as joyful, you give each other the space to express those as well, without criticism, without judgment, without pointing fingers, or without the need to be right. It's just, okay, this is the space. That's just so powerful. And I can only imagine that being in that space for you now is liberating. Does that feel that way for you? Like, compared to what you may have thought maybe just a few years prior to that, what your whole life might be like?
Oh yeah, it's definitely liberating. It feels good. And it's also still challenging. Things happen. You get triggered in things that you thought you were over, but you're really not over, and all that stuff. So it's just good to know that within the environment that we have created and the space we've created in our relationship, that we can work through it. We can talk through it. We can come to a place of understanding and seeing each other. Yeah. And we're able to see each other too. And it's a correlation with that and our vulnerability. Right. And talking about, well, this is why I feel this way, or this is what has happened in my life, or even a story that no one else has talked about, or you've talked about before or shared. It's like those kind of moments, it just opens you up to really see the person and love them even more.
Yes, love them even more, because what you're talking about, at least from what I got, it's a lot of the triggers that we will have are based on traumas that we've experienced at some point in our lives, whether it's childhood or adult, it doesn't matter. but something that somebody says or a way in which somebody might act unintentionally, certainly not to cause harm, but, and also it does trigger something. And the willingness to even say so is just so powerful in relationship, to say, I've had this traumatic experience, to be able to allow yourself to admit that both to yourself and then to be witnessed by another person, and then say, oh, that's okay. I hear you and I see you and I'm still here with you. I mean, that in and of itself is just generating healing. I mean, just the speaking of it is healing on some level a wound, right? So I love that. I love it so much. And I think another thing too that I wanted to bring up, and I think, we talked about it before we started recording, and I think it's powerful as well, is that I always ask people what their pronouns are, right? Because I'm trying to be conscious of the ways in which people want to be addressed. I think that's very important, to be respectful of other people. And you said that you don't know. Can you talk about your not knowingness, or where you are in that kind of LGBTQIA pronoun, just speak on that a little bit. I think it's.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
As far as pronouns, because it honestly, again, because of my upbringing and conditioning, it's like everything's new. I don't know what the terms are from, what people use and all that. But I know for sure in terms of my pronouns, I know that I'm a woman. I know that I refer to myself as a she or her in terms of pronouns. Where I fall in the LGBTQIA plus and plus more, I have always just not totally been sure, and but at the same time, I guess if I were to find one of those letters to help someone else understand my experience, because I think that's more of the purpose of it, is I would probably land somewhere in the queer, because queer just means, from what I understand, to be different. Yeah. So, but again, it's just, for me, even being someone who is queer or different or what have you, I still find it personally challenging to label myself, right? And to wear this shirt that says, yep, this is what I am. I do, however, I should say, I am aware of the challenges in the past for people who are different, what they have had to endure and struggle just to be acknowledged for who they are. So that piece I get, and I respect that. Where I identify myself, again, it's just like, I guess.
Sure. And I think that's important. Yeah. I mean, I think that's the whole thing, is that I say a lot of times, it's like one of my favorite quotes is that labels are not very useful unless it's on insulin vials. And I that's my diabetes, because I have diabetes. But like overall, you just said, and I think that's really a very important point, is that usually labels are to make someone else feel whatever it is, whether it's comfortable, aware, whatever it is. And I don't love labels. I'm fairly anti-label in my own life, because I don't like to be boxed in. I don't like the confines. I think life in general is an expansive and fairly limitless, energetic expression of self. And so for me, when I feel like there's a label on something, I feel like even if you are aware that the label is not physically confining you, there's still something energetically or mentally or emotionally when you say, I am this, that informs the ways in which you act. And even if you don't realize that. So I think that I actually like the fact that you're saying, I don't really have a label, because it doesn't confine you to be or act or express yourself in any one way just because that's what's normal. Again, I hate that word so much. I hate the word normal so much, because it's just so undefinable. But yeah, I love that. I love that, the not knowing and the expression of the not knowing. And it, to me, feels like you're comfortable with not knowing. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I would say my life has changed so dramatically in the last 4 or 5 years to where I know that there's more inside of me, not just in this respect, but in other respects, as an entrepreneur, as a woman, as an aunt, as a daughter, as so many things of who I am. I know that there's more. So who knows, right? There could be a lot of opportunities, a lot of different ways that this could go, but I know that at the end of the day, I'm going to be true to myself, and I'm going to be true to, you know, what it means for me to fully express myself.
Yeah, I love that. And so maybe a question that would be good would be for people who may be watching this, who may not be in a place where they feel they can express themselves in the ways in which you are so freely and beautifully doing. Maybe it's because they're still wrapped up in some way with a religious paradigm or a familial paradigm that tells them this is the way that you need to present in order to be valuable. Do you have any words of advice for those people?
Yeah, I would definitely say, it's interesting because I have a podcast to do with my friends called Just Keep Living. And
living? Oh, I like
yeah.
that. Okay.
Yeah. And
Good advice.
we recently did an episode where we talked about Pray Away, which is a Netflix documentary that talked about sort of the conversion therapy out there.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Oh my.
I know. It's very, very, yeah. It's it'll push your buttons for sure.
It's pushing my buttons. I haven't even seen it. So yeah.
So what I would say though is that if you feel that you express yourself differently from what you've been conditioned to be and whatnot, I think that on one hand, it's a great opportunity that's ahead of you, because I feel for me that over time, it's like I'm still a teacher at heart. And even in the way that I express and show up in my life, I'm teaching others. Yeah. I'm teaching that there are other ways to be, other ways to love, and other ways to express yourself that may not be what is on mainstream media and what everyone else is supposed to do. So on one hand, it's an opportunity to teach others about love and about the purity of what's in your heart. And on the other side, it is hard because it takes courage and it takes a lot of vulnerability to stand against the norm and to do something different, especially if you grew up in a context that didn't support that or encourage that. I would say too, we're also in a different time, thankfully, where people are more accepting. Even if they're not, there's enough exposure out there that they can understand to some extent what's going on. But that courage to stand up and to just be who you are is really something that is, for one, so self-rewarding. Like there's so much self-worth that you can experience in sort of being who you are. And just and I think that your courage will encourage other people to have courage, because I don't care what anybody says. Like if you're in a position where you are doing something different from the norm, there's a possibility that in expressing that to the people around you, that they could leave you, they could treat you differently, they could, talk about you, they could do all kinds of things. And at the end of the day, it's in the face of that adversity that you really understand who you are. And I just encourage to go forward, right? To be who you are, and you will find your friends, you'll find the community around you as well, to where even if your people forsake you or nobody wants to hang, like I'm dealing with that personally with some of my family members who refuse to physically see me. So, but that just, it indicates to me who's for me and who's not. And if anything, it'll peel those layers back and allow you just to see a new space for you where you can feel free. And I'm here to support if anybody, is going through something, especially if you are heavily tied to a religious background or conditioning, because that's a whole other thing to deal with, right? When you're thinking that God is not accepting of who I am. Yeah. No, when that is who you are, it's.
Yeah, that is who you are, and that's how you are made. I mean, the whole thing about the gay stuff in the Bible, that wasn't actually put into the Bible until the late 1900s. That was an inside job done by the government. They rewrote the Bible. I've done all the research, the texts all the way back, all of the different language interpretations. It wasn't man laying with man. It was man laying with little boys. That's what the original text of the Bible said.
Yeah.
Don't molest children, don't have same-sex relationships. That was never, ever in the actual Bible. Like that was redone in the late 1900s by some really, really insecure and very, very scared folks who did not want their power to be corrupted by humanity. So that's a whole other subject. Obviously, I'm quite passionate about it.
Yes.
But yeah.
It's true. And at the end of the day, it's about acceptance of yourself first, right? And embracing who you are. And the more you do that, you know, your circles may change, some things might change, but you'll find yourself around more people that are also accepting of you and who love you for who you are. So that's definitely a big proponent of mine. I want to communicate that and express that and create that in the world. Is just that acceptance. I know as well for people who maybe don't understand this, I also understand their perspective because I grew up in the church. Even though I had these feelings, there was still, you know, a knowing for me. I was like, well, that's wrong. That's not something that we do. So it's not even worth talking about. Like, that's just how it was. So, and in some cases, because when I was involved in the church and in these Christian circles, I was a teacher, a leader, you know, things like that. So I remember teaching against this. So I know exactly what you would say and how you feel and just the conflict that's there. But if you have ever experienced love and no love for yourself, you would not want to deny that to any other person, no matter what. And that starts within yourself and an acceptance of just who you are. You know, it's interesting too. I remember having a conversation with one of my family members and just kind of breaking down. I said, so let me get this right. You want me to be with a man so that you'll be happier.
Make that
and I said,
make that make sense.
Please, yeah, help that to make sense, especially when you see me now and you see that I'm like jovial, I'm loving my life. Like, you want me to go backwards and to be something for you. And so that's where, like I said, acceptance is just so important, acceptance of yourself. And when you do that, people are either going to be for you or against you, but it's going to define who your community really is. So having presented that question to my family members, like they didn't know what to say.
I was going to say, what was the response to that? Yeah.
There was nothing really that could be said. It was like, all right, you know, like moving on, you know, kind of a thing. But there's nothing that could be said because it's true. It's like, this is about me changing my behavior and how I feel and present myself for your happiness. And that's not my responsibility.
Exactly. Wow. If that's not an incredibly life-changing piece of advice to give people, it's not my responsibility to make other people happy. Period. End of sentence. It's your responsibility to make you happy. And that's really what kind of the essence of this entire chat show that I've been doing is to kind of just keep shining lights on so many different ways that people are saying yes to themselves. They're saying yes to what makes them happy. And oftentimes it is through a lot of adversity around other people who proclaim to love them and may actually love them in the ways that they are capable of. However, it's a very limited love. It's a very conditional love. It's a very, well, you must meet these criteria. And to me, that's not love. Like, that is not actually love. So, whew, that's powerful. So before we kind of bring this to a close, I always like to give folks a chance. If you have anything else to say, you don't have to have anything else. If you have anything else you want to add, any other gems of wisdom, because you have a lot of smart and helpful and very intentional things that you've shared here. So I want to give space for any more that you might like to share.
Yeah, I just, you know, my favorite quotes, and I don't know if it's an actual quote or if it's something that just came to me one day. Honestly, you know, some things come and it might be an idea that's already been out there.
Oh yeah.
But the quote is, to create, go within. Everything that we're looking to create, if you want more peace and acceptance and just an ability to be who you are it's not going to come from what's outside of us. It's going to come from with what's within us. And so I'm a big proponent of that type of work. And I feel like that experience for me and my journey has absolutely been, it's just been a staple. It's been a cornerstone for me to just to seek within those answers, the intelligence that's already inherent. Our heart and lungs are breathing without you having to do anything about it.
Right. That's correct. I say that all the time. Absolutely. Yeah.
So there's something at work that is powerful than what we see. And I think the more we can tap into that as it relates to our business, how we express ourselves, who we love, who we're around, makes a huge difference. So that's what I'll say. That's like the last thing I always like to share that.
That's beautiful and perfect in every way. So I cannot thank you enough, Parchelle, for just coming on here and just being your true self, which again, I think you probably realize even in the world today, as awake as many people are, that's still fairly rare, unfortunately. So yeah, I very much appreciate your conversation and your honesty and you as a human being. And I hope everybody out there who is watching this feels warm and fuzzy inside like I do, because I love hearing people love themselves and accept themselves and then kind of use that love and acceptance to push that narrative outside of themselves once they kind of get that for themselves. So I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I have. And for everybody out there, stay tuned and see you on the next episode of Real Life Sex. And thank you to Parchelle for a wonderful conversation.